Good afternoon. There's a fun fact here that all three of us have worked in local news, and all three of us graduated from SF State. Go Gators. But Harika and Sarahbeth, you would at SF State at the same time, together. Let's kick it off with you, Harika. Can you tell us a little bit about how the two of you met each other?
For sure. So Sarahbeth and I were at SF State about 4 years ago at the same time. That was when I just transferred to San Francisco State. I was new to the country, I was new to the school, new to everything. And Sarahbeth was one of the first people I met, talked to, and she knew about me, and she had such great insights for me to just navigate school and photojournalism. It was great. And that's not it. So 2 years after, I applied for the Fran Ortiz grant that SF State funds a project for a student for their transport expenses. And Sarahbeth was on the panel of judges that selected me for the grant. And the project was about the aftermath of police violence and how it affects families. So the project later informed me about my current CatchLight Enterprise project, which is about trust between police and the community of Stockton. So yeah, it's been great.
That's amazing that you guys have been supporting each other from day one. When I went to school a few years earlier, a few years before you guys, just in general, not necessarily the school, but the environment in general tends to be really competitive. And I feel like in the last few years, it's been morphing more to more collaboration and mutual admiration. And it's so great to see you guys leading the way on that. And Sarahbeth, can you tell us a little bit about maybe the last time that you guys connected?
Yeah, absolutely. So the last time that I actually saw Harika was at a protest in 2021 we were both covering the police-involved shooting of Roger Allen by Daly City Police. And I remember just being at this really intense protest and looking and seeing Harika, and it felt really relieving to see a familiar face, but also empowering to see another woman of color out there covering the protest too.
That's awesome. And that's a perfect segue to talk about what we came to talk about, local journalism and the impact of your work. Local journalism is really interesting. I feel like since you mentioned that anecdote about you two bumping into each other at an assignment, this can be like a really isolating career, a really isolating field. And even when you see someone else on assignment, you're still kind of doing your own thing. You're like, hey, how you doing? Okay, back to work. But it's really nice, and I think that's something that if you're a local journalist, probably you get to see a lot, is seeing like your people out there, and that can be really reassuring. So let's get into this local conversation. Each of you cover, Harika, you're covering Stockton for Bay City News, and Sarahbeth, you're covering Detroit for the Detroit, help me, the Detroit Free Press, thank you. And I feel like both of those cities tend to be cities that kind of get a bad rap, that kind of get up stereotypes, and I really love the work that you guys are doing because you're showing a more full picture of what these cities are, and that's part of what local journalism is all about, and that's the kind of stories that national outlets tend to miss. And so I want to get into your work and see the magic that happens at the local level. We are in a visual organization, so we're going to show this with visuals, with an amazing slideshow that's been prepared.
So a common thread between Harika and I's work is that we serve as watchdogs over the communities that we're covering. And one of the ways that we both do that is by holding officials accountable through the stories we're telling. When I started thinking about what story to share that covered this topic, I thought about an investigation that the Free Press started in the summer of 2022, right after I started my job there. And we dove into investigating the juvenile detention facilities in Detroit. And our investigation revealed that youth were being unable to leave their cells for more than a week at a time. They were denied basic care like being able to shower, brush their teeth, eat regular meals. And through this story, I met a woman named Dina Campbell, who was able to represent and share her son's story of what he was going through while being detained during those 7 months he was in there. And something Dina told me that stuck with me was, she said, despite what those children are put in that building for, whatever they did to make them have to go there, they are still human beings. You have to give someone a certain level of dignity and respect. I also met a 13-year-old girl who was denied her medication for bipolar disorder and PTSD while she was detained for 10 days. And I approached this situation by making an anonymous portrait in order to protect her identity as a minor, but also hopefully allow our readers to empathize with her, whether it's the painting on the wall inside of her home or the scrunchie in her hair. So that was the approach I took when I made that picture. And after over a dozen stories being published by the Free Press on this detention facility, we ended up seeing change. We ended up seeing the issue fixed with the understaffing and the overcrowding. And we also saw lawmakers respond. We saw a public health state of emergency declared after this. And although we did see change, this is still a story and a topic that we will be continue covering as local journalists in Detroit.
So the best part about being a local journalist is you have the time and the resources to dig deep into a story and tell all sides of it. You get to represent multiple sides of the narrative, so you're not just going in when there's breaking news and reporting the facts and getting out of there. So I got to do that as a local journalist and as a CatchLight Local Fellow through my enterprise project, which was about the trust between police and the community of Stockton. I met this mother 2 years ago in the summer of 2021. She lost her son to officer-involved shooting, and he died in that car, so she was showing me the bullet holes in that car. And the car was parked right outside her home, so she got to look at it every single day. And I met her during my project for the Fran Ortiz grant. It informed me about what's going on in Stockton because she helped me meet two more mothers. One was from Sacramento, one was from Fresno. They both lost their children in Stockton to officer-involved violence. So that got me really interested in exploring what it's like in Stockton and what the police is doing to bridge that gap to gain their trust back again. So I started in June. I was documenting all the series of events that unfolded in Stockton, including finding out we had a serial killer. And they arrested a suspect, and the same day, they held a vigil for his victims. And everyone showed up, the families were there, and I realized that the families that lost someone to the serial shootings, they were insanely grateful to the officers because they received the help. They believed that they got the justice they were looking for. And this woman, she is the sister of one of the victims. Her name is Pia Lopez. She was in tears the whole time, and she hugged the police chief, and the chief was consoling her. And I thought, wow, this was like a big turning point in my story because on one side, I'm looking at families that lost someone to police violence, that they don't trust the police. And on the other side, I'm seeing families that lost someone to violence in general, and they trust the police so much because they've been helped. And part of the project, at the vigil, we met Natasha Latour. She was a survivor of the serial shootings, and she told us that the police apologized to her at the vigil because of the way they handled her case. Because when she was shot, that was a year before the vigil, she approached the department. She was one of the first people to bring it up, but she said that the police didn't handle her case well, and we checked with the department. They admitted, they said it wasn't handled well, so we apologized to her. So we got to tell all the sides of this narrative, and there's a lot more to the project, but I'm just really proud of everything that I was able to report on as a local journalist.
During my time in Detroit, something that I've observed is that covering homelessness in Detroit is very different than covering homelessness in the Bay Area, because in Detroit, it's very hidden. It's not very visible. I don't drive around and see tent cities. Most shelters in Detroit look like, abandoned buildings. And so I started asking myself, how can I cover this topic if it's so hard to see? And I teamed up with a housing reporter, and we were covering a story on housing vouchers in Detroit. And that was when we met Tanya Hogan. And Tanya is 49 years old. She's been homeless now for a year, and this was her first time ever experiencing homelessness. She never envisioned herself being homeless. So all of these processes to find shelters and resources was completely new to her. And Tanya became homeless because her husband actually passed away in 2022 due to COVID complications. And she lost the home that they were renting and potentially going to be buying together. Right when we met Tanya, we both, myself and the reporter, immediately knew that she was someone we wanted to continue following. Because Tanya's story not only shows the barriers in place to secure stable housing, but it also shows how quickly someone can become homeless and how the rug can just be swept up under someone without them even expecting it. And something really special about getting to follow Tanya's story is the relationship that I've been able to build with her. But also the relationship and sources we've been able to build with different housing organizations and resource centers, so that hopefully when we run this story, we can provide those resources to other people who are looking for them. And something very exciting actually was I got a text about 2 days ago that Tanya finally secured her housing, and she will be moving into an apartment on Monday. So when I fly back to Detroit on Monday, I'll be able to document what that looks like for her and to continue following her journey.
That's amazing.
And something that I love about getting to work on these long-term projects is that you also get to see different parts of the human experiences. You get to see the positive moments in someone's life along with the challenging parts. And this image was taken, the most recent image I'd taken of Tanya. And on this day I found out she started seeing a woman named Tamara, and this is them out just enjoying the nice weather in Detroit, but this was also, this day marked 1 year since Tanya had been homeless, and so they were out celebrating her being closer to securing her housing. And something that Tanya told me was that it's been rough. I wasn't looking to be with anybody. I'm trying to get my health and my finances together, but that doesn't mean I can't have a life too. If we can enjoy life and have the same understanding, then why not?
That's beautiful.
So I work in Stockton as a full-time staff photojournalist, but I also work with Bay City news reporter Victoria Franco. And a lot of the stories that we work on, we work in collaboration. And the story that I'm about to talk about is one such story, and it's part of Report for America Latino project, which covers underrepresented issues. And although we started working on this story 2 months ago, this really started back in October when they had a community meeting. The police organized a community meeting to talk about the serial killer and what's going on and stuff. And a lot of people showed up, and a lot of people that showed up were Spanish speakers. They didn't speak any English, which means there should have been translation services, but there weren't. So the story, our story, turned out to be about how there was a town hall about serial killer, but there were no translation services because a lot of them that show up were farm workers who wake up early in the morning and go out, and they were really worried for their safety. And the police just the day before announced that the shooter was targeting mainly Hispanic men. So it was really scary for them. And a few months later, in February, on February 14th, Valentine's Day, there was another police meeting. They were presenting crime stats for the neighborhood, and the woman in the picture, Griselda Juarez, was there. She requested translation services, but again, there were nothing. So we thought that was interesting. It's been so long, and there's still no translation services. So we talked to Griselda, and one of the quotes that really stuck with us was, she said, I show up to all these meetings, although they don't have any translation services, but I want the Latino voice to be heard. But at the same time, I feel like I'm only going there to warm up the chairs. And we're like, yeah, we need to talk about this, right? So we followed her around. We realized that she has a busy day. She gets all of her work done, shows up at these meetings, but her voice isn't heard. And part of the project, we also met Luis Magana. It's the man sitting on the right corner with a hat. He is a community activist, and it's his full-time work, just to go out into the Spanish community, talk to them, give them resources that are available, because they don't speak English, right? So he wakes up at 4 in the morning, gets out there to these local taquerias so he can get a hold of farm workers grabbing lunch at 5 o'clock in the morning. So he's there just grabbing menudo with one of the farm workers, and I thought, wow. And part of that story, this is like, it wasn't actually part of the story. We were covering a city council meeting in Lodi, which is right next to Stockton. And this meeting was a special meeting to fill a vacant seat for a city council member. And there were so many Spanish speakers at this meeting. But guess what? They were supporting this one man. They were able to make public comment, every single one of them, because of the translation services, and they had their earpiece, they had an interpreter, their voice was heard, and they ended up electing the man they were supporting. So that's the power of representation, right? That's the power of making these voices heard. So we were like, this is what Stockton needs to do. This is what they can learn from Lodi and implement in their cities, right? So we found out just this week that Stockton brought in some machines, and they're gonna have interpretation services, and they're gonna have a meeting on May 9th, and yeah, they're gonna have interpretation services. We're gonna be there. We're gonna make sure, we're gonna check and find out if that's gonna happen. So we're really happy that that happened, right? But at the same time, the way these events played out, Victoria and I wondered if these stories just fall into our laps, because we're not out there looking for them. We show up and we're like, wow, and we notice these things. So we're like, are we just lucky that these things fall into our laps? But then we realize that's the perk of being a local journalist, right? You're always present, and you're noticing these things that others might not. Like, we're like, what if we didn't tell this story? Would it ever be reported if we didn't report on it? So yeah, that's really the best part about being a local journalist, I guess.
Thank you so much for sharing these really personal images. There's a lot of closeness, there's a lot of empathy, I feel like, in the work that the both of you do. And it's so amazing to hear that, you know, you write this story about a lack of translations in a town that's like 50% Latino, and a few weeks later, after your story comes out, that happens. So local journalism tends to be something that is seen as like a stepping stone to something else for a lot of journalists that are developing their careers. And I want to see more and more local news becoming not just a stepping stone to something else, but its own destination, its own place that people want to be at and do the kind of magic that you guys are doing with your work. For our last question to wrap up, what do you feel is the impact? I mean, you've shown some examples, but like, how does it impact you, and how do you see yourself in the next few years? You want to start us off, Harika?
Sure. So I didn't choose local journalism. Report for America and CatchLight put me in local journalism, and I've never been more grateful.
It chose you.
It chose me. So we've seen massive impact just after we started reporting in Stockton, because Stockton's been one of the news deserts. They don't have a lot of news organizations out there reporting on the local stories. So the more and more we report these stories, we're like, this helps put Stockton on the map. Like you said earlier, Mabel, Stockton doesn't have a good rap. So I just spoke with someone earlier, and they were like, is it safe to live in Stockton? I'm like, it is. It's probably more safe to live in Stockton than it is in San Francisco. So we want to tell more positive stories about the community and put them on the map, and that's what I see in the future coming for me and for Stockton.
Yeah, thanks for showing us the magic that happens in those cities and that there's real communities with real beautiful things happening. What about you, Sarahbeth? You want to take us home?
Coming from a perspective of covering national news and seeing where the policies and decisions are being made, it was really important for me to go back to a local community so that I could dig deeper into that community and tell the stories of how those decisions are actually impacting the people on the ground. And especially in a place like Detroit that is so stereotyped and stigmatized by the general public, I think that our work is incredibly important to show, as Harika mentioned, to provide that representation. So thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for all the amazing work that you do in your communities.